Good morning, everyone. Take a moment to step back in time to Sydney, New South Wales, Tuesday, the 31st of January, 1984. Picture it, the end of a long, sweltering summer month. The air itself shimmered above the pavement. Heat radiated off sandstone buildings. Cicadas screeched in the trees, and commuters bustled through the city, eager to escape into the cool air of banks, shops, and offices. No one could have predicted that within hours, Sydney would be paralyzed by a crime so extraordinary it was compared to a Hollywood action film. The man behind the mask. The man at the center of this extraordinary crime was Haki Bahadur Atahan, a name etched into Australian criminal history. Atahan was a 35-year-old Turkish immigrant, also known as Haki Tim Atahan or Haki Tim Bahadur Atahan. By 1984, he was unemployed, but he had crafted a secret life funded by crime. Atahan was not some petty thief. He was regarded by police as a prolific and accomplished robber, a master of disguise who had pulled off an astonishing 16 or 17 bank robberies in less than a year, some say as many as 18. In total, he pocketed over $150,000, a fortune in the early 1980s. His methods were simple but effective. He would don a wig, stroll into a bank with a briefcase, and issue cold, calculated demands. Staff were ordered to fill the case with cash while he kept his pistol visible. Then, in a flash, he would vanish. He was known to hit 2 banks within minutes of each other, leaving investigators scrambling. In fact, on the very morning of his final siege, he robbed the ANZ Bank and then the State Bank just 5 minutes apart. Some reports suggest he managed to rob 2 or 3 banks in total before fate caught up with him that day. His audacity knew no bounds. On one occasion, he robbed a bank in Bondi where, by sheer chance, one of the tellers was the daughter of the armed hold-up squad. Yet even then, he managed to escape unscathed. Police grew increasingly frustrated, describing him as a criminal who seemed to elude them at every corner. But Atahan's double life wasn't just about cash. It was about image. He poured his stolen money into an extravagant lifestyle. He rented a luxurious penthouse apartment in Manly, drove expensive cars, and indulged heavily in gambling and prostitutes. Forensic criminologist Dr. Zanti Mallet, who later examined his diaries, described him as a deeply arrogant and ruthless man. His personal writings revealed a chilling self-image. He saw himself as the best robber in Australia, and he vowed that no cop would ever take him alive. And in many ways, he lived up to his own myth. On January 31st, 1984, his arrogance set in motion the day that would end his life and shock Sydney. After his morning robberies, Atahan was spotted and pursued by a bank teller and 2 passing police officers. Panicking, he bolted down George Street and in desperation ran directly into the Commonwealth Bank. Inside, he brandished his revolver and took 11 hostages. He fired 2 warning shots into the ceiling, proof to police negotiators outside that he was deadly serious. Guided by a forensic psychologist, police quickly concluded that he was crazed and would kill if pressed too hard. Atahan released the customers and 4 female staff, but he held on to 5 male staff members, keeping them as his bargaining chips. He even forced his way into the bank's safe. Then, in a moment that cemented his place in true crime lore, Atahan staged his escape. He emerged from the bank surrounded by the 5 male hostages, forcing each man to place a hand on his head, creating a human shield. To the snipers watching from rooftops, it was impossible to take a shot without risking innocent lives. The scene was likened to the Al Pacino movie Dog Day Afternoon, except this was no Hollywood film. This was real. Atahan forced the men into a Datsun sedan conveniently left nearby with the keys in the ignition. He made the bank manager drive, blasting through police blockades. What followed was 6 hours of live, unfolding drama. A convoy of 39 police cars, a helicopter, and 4 water police launches joined the pursuit. Crowds lined the streets cheering as if it were entertainment, unaware of the mortal danger inside the car. During the chase, Atahan released one hostage, but stopped to pick up his 23-year-old girlfriend, Sharon Oliver. At one point, when journalist Norm Lipson approached the vehicle, Atahan thrust his pistol in his face and snarled, "Fuck off or I'll shoot you." Lipson dropped flat onto the bitumen without hesitation. The chase stretched across the harbour bridge, through Bondi and Manly, until finally the Datsun was trapped at the Spit Bridge, which had been raised to block his escape. Here, the standoff reached its deadly conclusion. As officers surrounded the car, Detective Senior Constable Steve Canellis tried to negotiate face-to-face. Atahan, true to his vow, refused to surrender. In a sudden flash, he fired his .32 ACP revolver at point-blank range, the bullet striking Canellis between the eyes. Miraculously, Canellis survived. That was the breaking point. From sniper positions above, Detective Senior Constable Donald Packer and Detective Sergeant John Nagel fired into the car. Atahan was struck in the head and chest. He died instantly, fulfilling his grim promise that he would never be taken alive. The morning of the robbery. It was just after 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, 31 January 1984, when Haki Beheder Atahan's day of crime kicked into overdrive. The heat was already oppressive, the city moving with that familiar weekday rhythm, but for many, including Atahan, this morning would be anything but ordinary. The first 2 banks. Atahan's first target that morning was the ANZ branch in Sydney's central business district. He robbed it in a manner consistent with his modus operandi, likely entering with a disguise, wig, carrying a briefcase, threatening staff, filling the briefcase with cash, then leaving quickly. Almost immediately after leaving that ANZ branch, only about 5 minutes later, he walked directly into the State Bank located right next door. That proximity gave him both confidence and speed. Few interruptions, little time for police or witnesses to react between the 2 robberies. These early robberies were slick and bold. Atahan was known for robbing 2 banks in quick succession, using the short window before alarms and coordinated responses could catch up. It seems that was precisely what he was counting on. Tension builds. After the second robbery, everything began to shift. One of the bank tellers, or someone in or near the State Bank, raised the alarm, or at least drew attention to what was happening. Police were alerted. Passers-by noticed something amiss. Atahan, who had so far managed to slip in and out of banks almost routinely, now sensed pressure. According to reports, a bank teller gave chase, possibly shouting, while 2 passing police officers spotted him and began to pursue. For Atahan, this was the moment when things escalated beyond what he may have fully planned. Rather than maintaining composure or slipping away, he panicked. In that panic, he did something rarer. Instead of escaping, he ran directly into yet another bank, the Commonwealth Bank, on George Street. It was at that point that the siege truly began. Why George Street? Why the Commonwealth Bank? The Commonwealth Bank on George Street was a major, busy branch, central, staffed, and regularly used. Walking in there meant attention would be immediate. It was also a location where Atahan could leverage the crowd, the staff, and the layout to his advantage, once trapped. Because he'd already robbed neighboring banks, police and media were starting to mobilize. The area was now alert. If he intended to get away quietly, George Street was one of the riskier places. But perhaps Atahan calculated that if he was going to make a stand, this was where he could cause maximum impact, or had the best odds of bargaining strength with hostages. Inside the Commonwealth Bank, upon entry, Atahan took 11 people hostage, staff and customers. He fired at least 2 warning shots from his pistol, one into the ceiling, to assert control and scare off immediate resistance. Negotiations began. Police, who by this time already had some clue of his earlier robberies that morning, were on high alert. They brought in tactical units and set up containment around the bank. Atahan released all customers and then later released 4 female staff, but crucially held on to 5 male staff members, using them as human shields, a critical ploy that would figure strongly in what followed. Inside the bank, customers screamed as Atahan waved his revolver. He fired 2 warning shots into the ceiling. One hostage, a teller, later said in a documentary, "The noise was deafening. He screamed at us to get on the floor. I thought, this is it. We're going to die in here." Police surrounded the building within minutes. Snipers took positions. Negotiators tried to reason with him. Another hostage recalled, "He kept saying, 'You move, I shoot. You breathe wrong, I shoot.' I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was madness, but also very calculated." The human shields. 2 hours later, Atahan forced his captives to surround him. Each man had to press a hand to his head. Bank manager John O'Neill, one of the 5 men, remembered, "He shoved a gun in my ribs and said, 'You're my armor now.' We were literally his shield." Together, they shuffled into a nearby Datsun sedan. To police marksmen watching from rooftops, there was no way to take a clean shot. The chase through Sydney. What followed was chaos. 39 police cars, a helicopter, and 4 water police launches joined the pursuit. Crowds cheered from sidewalks as the convoy moved across the Sydney Harbour Bridge and through the city's eastern suburbs. A hostage later told journalists, "We could see people laughing, clapping, waving at the car. They thought it was a show. They had no idea we were praying we wouldn't be killed." Then came one of the most surreal moments of the day. Atahan stopped to let his girlfriend, Sharon Oliver, into the car. A reporter described the scene as like something out of Dog Day Afternoon. Journalist Norm Lipson ran toward the vehicle at one point. He later admitted, "I thought maybe I could get a word. Then suddenly the barrel of a gun was in my face. He told me to F off or he'd shoot me. I didn't argue. I hit the deck fast." The final stand at Spit Bridge. The chase ended at the Spit Bridge, raised to block his path. Surrounded, Atahan screamed abuse at police, swaying inside the car to prevent a sniper's shot. Detective Senior Constable Steve Canellis made a desperate gamble. He approached the driver's side to negotiate. Canellis later recalled, "I thought maybe I could talk him down. I'd done it before. But this bloke wasn't listening to reason. I remember seeing the gun come up, then bang, everything went black. The bullet struck him between the eyes. Officers thought he was dead. From their vantage point, snipers had no choice. Detective Senior Constable Donald Packer fired through the side window. Detective Sergeant John Nagel fired through the rear. Atahan was hit in the head and chest. He slumped forward. The siege was over. The aftermath. Miraculously, Canellis survived. "When I woke up, I thought, well, I'm still here. I guess it wasn't my time." Fragments of the bullet remained in his body until his retirement. The hostages were freed. Some wept, others stood silent, stunned. One said later, "When the shot came and he dropped, I didn't know whether to cheer or collapse. I had been holding my breath for hours." Only Atahan was killed. His criminal career ended exactly as he had predicted. Legacy. The siege seared itself into Sydney's memory. John Burney's famous photograph of Atahan and his human shields became front-page news. Decades later, in a documentary reunion, hostages embraced the officers who had saved them. One man whispered, "I never thought I'd see you again. Thank you." Yet despite the drama, the event has faded from the wider public consciousness, overshadowed by later tragedies such as the 2014 Martin Place siege. Still, experts agree it was a turning point. Police negotiation tactics were sharpened, training for armed sieges became more rigorous. Today, the Australian Federal Police reports resolving 98% of incidents without force. In 1984, that wasn't the case. Closing reflection. The siege of Spitbridge was more than just a headline-grabbing crime. It was a 6-hour ordeal that revealed the arrogance of a career criminal, the unimaginable fear of innocent hostages, and the extraordinary bravery of police officers who risked everything. For those caught up in it, the terrified bank staff, the officers under fire, and even the journalists who found themselves part of the story, the scars ran deep. And yet, despite its scale, the events slowly slipped from public memory, overshadowed by later tragedies. It wasn't until decades later that the full story was told again, in remarkable detail. Channel 9 revisited the crime with its acclaimed series Murder, Lies, and Alibis. The second installment, The Bank Job, pieced together the entire chain of events, Haki Tim Atahan's audacious robbery spree, his chilling vow never to be taken alive, the hostage crisis in the Commonwealth Bank, his daring escape using human shields, and the extraordinary car chase that shut down Sydney. The documentary, crafted by award-winning journalist Mark Llewellyn, unearthed rare original footage and paired it with first-hand testimony, much of it shared publicly for the first time. Hostages, who had lived in silence for years, finally spoke about the terror they endured. Officers like Steve Canellis, who survived a bullet wound between the eyes, reflected on the risks they took and the lives they saved. Llewellyn himself described it as uncovering extraordinary first-hand accounts told for the first time by the hostages and the insanely courageous policemen who took the ultimate risk to save them. One of the most powerful aspects of the bank job was the reunion it created nearly 35 years later. On the very ground near the Spitbridge where the crisis ended, the hostages, including Jeff Findlay, Michael Williams, Stephen Lamb, Joanne Duffy, Anne Delutius, and Margaret Hooper, who was heavily pregnant at the time, met again with the officers who had risked their lives, Steve Canellis, Donald Packer, and John Nagel. Journalists like Norm Lipson, who once stared down Atahan's revolver, also returned. Together, they stood not as victims or bystanders, but as survivors of a story once forgotten, finally acknowledged. Murder, Lies, and Alibis, The Bank Job, aired on Channel 9 on Monday, July 22nd at 9:15 p.m. and remains accessible today on YouTube. It serves as both a riveting documentary and a reminder that beneath the sensational headlines were ordinary people forced into extraordinary circumstances. The siege of Spitbridge may have ended with one man's violent death, but its legacy endures through the courage of those who lived to tell the tale, the lessons learned by law enforcement, and the haunting reminder of how quickly an ordinary summer's day in Sydney can transform into a fight for survival.